Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this, March 14th, 2018 day on our calendar. Greg Anthony here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Yesterday I did a show called the Top 10 Scandals in Recent History of the Vatican. There's probably a top 25,000, but I boiled it down to 10. And I got some good response on it, so somebody said, got any more top 10 stories you can do? So I dug into my story chest and came up with the top 10 bizarre lost traditions of the Catholic Church. And why don't I had to ask for help on this, and I found someone who did a really nice video on it. So it's about 10 minutes long. Excuse me. Let's look at the top 10 bizarre lost traditions of the Catholic Church.
Top 10 lost traditions of the Catholic Church. Number 10. Priest suicide. Heaven is a great place to be. As a matter of fact, it was such a great place compared to the squalor and despair of the old world. Priests often committed suicide to be with the Lord in the afterlife. It wasn't until the 4th century AD that St. Augustine condemned the practice, not so much due to theology, but due to the fact that Christians were offing themselves in such large numbers. For 1,000 years after, suicide was discouraged because if there were no priests, there would be no one to lead the congregation. By the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas had fortified the Church's stance against suicide based on the theological argument that taking one's own life was a sin against God. Civil and criminal laws followed, outlining suicide as a crime in multiple Christian nations. Number 9. Uncircumcision. Why don't you males out there have your foreskin? Well, due to religious beliefs, that is the conventional wisdom. In reality, the Catholic Church doesn't really care either way. Way back in the year 50 AD, the Council of Jerusalem rejected circumcision as a requirement for Gentile converts to Christianity. Actually, the topic of circumcision was one of the first subjects that differentiated Jews and early Christians in the 1st century AD. In the New Testament, there are contradictory statements regarding circumcision, and some Catholic scholars consider circumcision an act of mutilation. If that's the case, then why does no one today reject circumcision? Well, many Catholics still refer back to the tenets of Mosaic law back in the Old Testament, despite that being the wrong interpretation of the situation, because New Testament tenets are supposed to supersede the tenets of the Old Testament. If Paul wrote to the Corinthians, circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Why is there so much confusion over circumcision? Today, circumcision is mostly performed for health reasons. Number 8. Latin Mass. When you worship the Lord today, no matter what your Christian denomination, it is assumed that you do so in your own language. It makes sense, but that hasn't always been the case. Between 1570 and 1962, nearly 100 years, most Catholics around the world celebrated Mass in Latin. Today, Latin is still the official language in Vatican City, and the business of the Church is done in Latin, but the Vatican Council allowed Masses to be more accessible to the Scripture by making the language vernacular. Despite the common sense of worshipping in your native tongue, the Latin Mass is making a bit of a comeback in conservative Catholic parishes. Number 7. Indulgences. Today, an indulgence is an extra-sacramental remission of the temporal punishment due, in God's justice, to sin that has been forgiven, which remission is granted by the Church. That's nice, but during the more, corrupt days of the Church, indulgences were monetary purchases of salvation. The practice of using indulgences can be traced back to the 6th century, but they had been so abused that the topic was one of the pillars of reform written about in Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517. No matter how you feel about the Church currently, no church leaders are brazen enough in the age of the internet to promise the congregation eternal life in exchange for cash. Number 6. Multiple popes.
History has turned losing popes into anti-popes. Between the years 200 and 1450, regional factions and political differences generated multiple popes dozens of times, each time vying for the head of the church. One of the most deplorable stories of papal succession is when Pope Benedict VI was imprisoned and murdered by the followers of Boniface VII. Boniface VII plundered the treasury at the Vatican Basilica and went into exile for a decade as Benedict VII quietly ruled over the church. Returning to Rome 10 years later, Boniface VII overpowered John XIV, literally, and forced him into one of the dungeons, where he later died. Being indirectly responsible for the deaths of two popes, Boniface's reign was short as he was killed in the year 985. Due, in all probability, to violence, the body of Boniface was exposed to the insults of the populace, dragged through the streets of the city, and, finally, naked and covered in wounds, flung under the statue of Marcus Aurelius. History labelled Boniface VII an anti-pope after his death. Number 5. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty officially positioned the Vatican City as neutral in international relations. On and off for 1,000 years prior, the head of the Catholic Church didn't declare war on other nations, but declared crusades against other nations, forcing conversions of the infidels at the end of a sword. The first crusade was ordered by Pope Urban II in the year 1095, not to be confused with the Crusade of 1101, directed by Urban II's successor, Pope Paschal II. Not to be confused with the Second Crusade, ordered in the year of 1145 by Pope Eugene III, not to be confused with the Third Crusade, engineered by Pope Gregory VIII. Number 4. Married priests. Peter, the first leader of the Church, was a married man. The first regulation regarding married priests was the Council of Elvira in the year 306. Not forbidding marriage, mind you, but declaring the priests and other elders of the Church are to abstain completely from sexual intercourse with their wives and from the procreation of children. Insert your no sex during marriage joke here. 100 years later, the Council of Carthage declared no conjugal relations of any type were allowed. Decrees, canons, announcements, councils all continued to try to curb the sexual appetite of the priests until the First Lateran Council of 1123, finally stating, once and for all, that we forbid priests, deacons, subdeacons, and monks to have concubines or enter into the contract of marriage. 1,000 years later, the clergy still struggles with the question of marriage. For every couple of years, a high-profile case of a clergyman with a secret family hits the media. One of the most recent examples was the 2012 resignation of auxiliary bishop of Los Angeles, Gabino Zavala, resigning after the existence of a secret wife and 2 children was discovered. Number 3. Dead, unbaptized babies go to hell. In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI decreed that unbaptized babies most probably go to heaven, reflecting a growing awareness of God's mercy, which is almost certainly the polar opposite of the Church's teachings for nearly the 1,500 years prior. For during the 5th century, St. Augustine concluded that infants who die without baptism are consigned to hell. Relenting a bit during the 13th century, church leaders decreed that unbaptized infants were in limbo, deprived of the vision of God, yet did not suffer because they were unaware of what they were deprived of. Which begs the question, is 2007 the year God swooped down from heaven and rose up all the dead, unbaptized babies from hell, or low, or wherever? Number 2. Non-infallibility. With all the strife and instability of the Middle Ages, even the popes were scrutinized for their leadership. In a clever idea spawned from Pope Gregory VII in the year 1075, the Dictatus Papae declared that nobody could judge a pope except for God, amongst other things, including princes should kiss the Pope's feet, by introducing the concept of papal infallibility, which was cemented dogmatically by the First Vatican Council. A pope is preserved from the possibility of error. Without becoming too blasphemous, doesn't infallibility open up a whole new can of worms? Like, does the Pope become infallible at coronation, at birth, when he becomes a priest? And secondly, when a Pope apologizes for mistakes of earlier papal administrations, how can you apologize for mistakes that technically didn't exist because the previous administration was infallible? And currently, are you still infallible in retirements? And forget it, my head hurts. Number 1. Joseph as the father. The concept of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ did not originate with Peter. Instead, it took about 50 to 100 years to figure out that Mary was a virgin. The virgin birth of Jesus is even referenced in the Quran, but there are no references to the virgin birth in the Bible until the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, whose dates of composition are speculated by scholars to be between the years 60 to 100 AD and 70 to 110 AD, respectively. By the end of the 2nd century, Catholic doctrine universally accepted the virgin birth. What happened over that century? The Church weeded out Gnostic groups such as the Ebionites that didn't believe in the virgin birth and other tenets of today's Catholic faith. Not only was Mary a virgin, but by the 3rd century, the Church had come up with Mary as a perpetual virgin. In the past couple of hundred years, some Protestant sects have countered that Mary and Joseph actually had a minimum of 7 children, but that only Jesus was of virginal origins. If you enjoyed this video, be sure...
Yes, if you enjoyed that, this guy puts out a number of these top 10 things at Top Tens. That's TOPTENZ. Okay, a lot of times on this show we talk about how people are really misunderstand the Catholic Church, the Vatican, how they don't check it out, they don't look at the real what's going on behind the scenes. So I saw this little presentation called 5 Common Mistakes Catholics Make in Defending Catholicism.
All right, well, you're ready to become an apologist, a defender of the Catholic faith, but there are mistakes that a lot of people make as they begin to do Catholic apologetics. In fact, I've done almost all of these mistakes, and so we want to crystallize today 5 really common mistakes that people make when they're doing Catholic apologetics. And the first one is the most common, and I've certainly been guilty of it in my past, and that is having an emotional response as you're engaged in apologetics. Probably the most common response is one of anger, or getting into an argument, or showing frustration with the other person. Yes, if you're doing apologetics, the person disagrees with you. That's the very basis of apologetics. But you want to keep cool, calm, and relaxed. Remember, this is about compassion. We're doing this with gentleness and compassion. So if we're getting all huffed up and angry and, using body language that's aggressive or a tone of voice that's aggressive, that's not only going to turn the person off from hearing you, but also it's going to cloud your own judgment. You're not going to speak and articulate and argue as well as you should if you are stirred up with this passion of anger, what Thomas Aquinas calls.
You see, what I'm doing is I'm really helping you Catholics here who really want to defend your church. Most of them really get angry. So I thought I'd give you a little refresher course. But do me a favor. If I help you out, you help me out. And the next time, start checking out the real scandals of the Vatican and your church. And start checking out what the hierarchy of your organization is really about.
A passion, an emotion of anger. Under this kind of umbrella of having an emotional response comes with it, responses, maybe saying, well, if you believe that, you're going to go to hell. It's not helpful to use that kind of loaded language. Or if you say something like, well, that's stupid, or, well, that's what Hitler would have thought. Of course, people always use the Hitler argument. It kind of sets you up to move you on. Well, that's how Hitler thought. Again, no one really thinks of themselves as a Hitler follower or a Nazi, and maybe their thinking does tend in that way, but again, it's kind of bombastic, and it's going to turn the person off. So avoid that kind of an argument. And of course, yelling. And I want to add one more thing here. I think it's counterproductive to do apologetics through a electronic written medium. I'm thinking here especially of email and text. In email, so much of your intent, your voice inflection, and even your caring can be lost, and they can feel threatened that you're judging them or that you're attacking them. So email is not the best way. If that's all you have, great, but ideally you want to do this face-to-face, and of course I think texting is even worse. Don't try to text apologetics. Meet with someone with coffee or dinner or in a casual setting and have a civil and engaging conversation and bring the best of your knowledge and your skill to the situation. Now, number 2, the second probably most common mistake that people make when they're doing apologetics is they don't have enough research. They're coming to the battle, but they don't have enough weapons. They don't have enough ammo. They don't have the knowledge that they need. So often you'll have very well-meaning, Christian people who, a Mormon will come to the door, a Jehovah's Witness, or a Jewish person will ask them their beliefs, or even more often, a Protestant friend who's very zealous in their faith will challenge a Catholic on a teaching. Maybe if it's a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, maybe the Trinity. The Protestant, maybe it's salvation by faith alone. The Catholic has an intuitive understanding that we're not justified by faith alone, and they believe in the Eucharist, they believe in the Trinity, but they don't have a way to articulate the teachings of the church. They don't know where to go in the Bible to find it. They don't know where to go into the catechism or church documents, church history. They don't know which council that teaching was defined at. So although they have the truth, they're just not able to express it. And this is a very common mistake. I think most Catholics deal with this, and this is one of the reasons why there's kind of a great interest in Catholic apologetics, because we have the faith, we have a belief in it, but we want to be able to defend it with a researched, reasonable answer. So I think that's part of this whole certificate of Catholic apologetics at the St. Thomas Institute, is getting the research done, finding the tools, having the resources, so that when you make an answer, you can be confident when you defend the faith. Okay, the third mistake that people make is not listening to the other person. And I sometimes cringe because I overhear conversations, or I'm with people in a group and they're talking about theology. And often Catholics who are well-meaning assume, and sometimes assume wrongly, that Protestantism is just Protestantism. So they may assume that all Protestants, for example, deny infant baptism, which is not the case. Of course, if you live in the South, there's a lot of Southern Baptists, so you might think that, but you're Lutheran, you're Episcopalian, you're Presbyterian, you're Reformed, they all affirm infant baptism. So sometimes they'll rush into an argument assuming the position of the other person, and they assumed too much. This can also happen when you're discussing things with a Muslim. I've had debates and discussions with Muslim, both that I didn't know and people who were friends. And sometimes Catholics will assume much less of the knowledge of a Muslim than they actually have. For example, Islam teaches that Jesus, the historical Jesus, although he's not the Son of God, is the Messiah. And they do assume that he was born of a virgin. So there is some contact or some continuity there, but a lot of Catholics don't know that. And so when they rush in and start trying to defend Catholic Christology, which they should, they're not completely aware of the other person's belief, the Muslim person's belief. This also happens with Jewish friends. Judaism has no magisterium, and so just like in Protestantism, Jewish friends and family have different beliefs. Some of them believe in the afterlife, some of them don't believe in the afterlife. You have to actually talk to them to understand what they believe. And this reminds us that it's not helpful to just think of them as a world religion, like as a representative of Muslim. This is a person in history who has maybe various beliefs. You need to be quiet and listen to them so that you can then prepare how to respond. It's kind of like the game of chess. Chess is not played in just one move at a time. The best chess players are thinking 2 moves, 3 moves, 4 moves, sometimes 5 or more moves ahead. You need to listen. You need to watch their moves on the
Okay, enough of that. That was for you Catholics out there who want to debate Protestants regarding why Catholicism isn't Christianity when a Protestant comes up to you and says that. And how many Protestants will really say that? Crazy, isn't it? Anyway, you take that for what it's worth. Well, the one thing we always say on this show is seek the truth, and don't be afraid to include the Jesuits in the New World Order. And if you seek the truth, you'll find that out eventually. But what about the Jesuits erasing our flat earth? Wake up to the truth. If you seek the truth, find the answers. And here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video here at my channel, Jesus Truth. Thank you very much for stopping by. So, I have another amazing documentary for you guys. This one called Jesuits Erasing the Flat Earth. This video reinforces and verifies the information from the last video I did called Flat Earth, Jesuits and the Global Conspiracy. And once again, it exposes the greatest lie of all time, which is that we live on a globe Earth that is spinning through space, which is just ridiculous. This video was produced by the YouTube channel called Migmag. I will leave a link down below. And to Migmag, I would like to say thank you and much respect, brother, much respect for producing some great videos. So without further ado, sit back and enjoy the truth, and I will see you next time. God bless.
Okay, we'll watch this again. And here we go. Okay, here we go. A Jesuit Astronomy and Vatican Intrigue.
Migmag's special report. For 1,000 years, from roughly 500 AD to the civilized world was, but not military Rome, religious Rome. The Roman Empire had mutated from a military power into a religious one, co-opting the beliefs of Christianity and mixing them with ancient Egyptian, Greco, and Babylonian paganism. Christian doctrine that came directly from Jesus Christ and was transcribed in the Bible stated that each individual had the liberty and independence to govern their own salvation by cultivating a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The new religious Roman Empire insinuated herself in between Christ and the believer and said if you wanted to have your soul saved, you had to rely on the priests, bishops, and cardinals of Rome. This was the worst kind of slavery because it was a slavery of disinformation. Now and again, sincere Bible-believing Christians like the Waldensians of the Alps, the Albigensians, Jerome of Prague, John Wycliffe and his Lollards, Jan Hus of Bohemia, would rebel against this Roman rule and show Christians that Vatican doctrines claiming that you needed Rome to ensure your salvation were contradicted by the Bible. As a result, the papacy strictly forbade Bibles to be placed into the hands of the common person and only allowed Jerome's Latin Vulgate to be handled by clergy. Men like John Wycliffe painstakingly translated the Vulgates into the language of the people. For Wycliffe, it was English. English Bibles were then slowly and carefully copied and handled by Wycliffe's followers, who handed them out to and taught the people. In response, Roman authorities captured Wycliffe's followers, called Lollards, tied their Bibles around their necks and burned them alive. It's what so-called Christian Rome did to all of her enemies, including Jerome of Prague and Jan Hus. John Fox's Book of Martyrs, originally titled Acts and Monuments, is completely filled with examples of Catholic authorities torturing and murdering Christians. And when a Lollard was burned with a Bible hanging around his neck, it was a terrible loss, because not only were Christians being burned alive, but hand-copied Bibles were irreplaceable. But in 1517, a new rebel stepped up, an Augustinian monk from Germany named Martin Luther. Luther was furious that Pope Leo X, Giovanni de' Medici, from the powerful Medici family, who helped to rule the world then and including through to today, had sent their attack dogs, the Dominicans, to cheat the common people out of their money by claiming they could buy what is called an indulgence, which is basically a receipt of forgiven sin. By paying...
Okay, we're going to continue with that in the second half hour here on the Investigative Journal, back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the Scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, back for the second half hour, and we're listening to a presentation called Jesuits Erasing Our Flat Earth, Wake Up to the Truth. Sometimes I like to go to the comments on the videos, and this is all about the flat earth. And the Super Ascension 2012 says the earth is geocentric and does not move. The sun is small and orbits the earth, as do the moon and the stars. The earth is covered by a dome which rotates clockwise. All celestial bodies are incorporeal lights generating spiritual energies sent from heaven. The elites lie in order to take your souls away from the Creator and maintain control. Another man says, I've binged on this YouTube channel for 6 hours straight. I'm 70 years old. What good information. Never heard this before. And then another man says, thanks be to those saints who did everything to record the truth of Christ. Now, Jimmy Siega says this: yes, I have been banned from 2 churches for leaving Catholic churches for leaving Christian tracts and asking a Catholic priest if he has read John 3:1 through 21. The Great Deception. And goes on. Spectacular work, good video. Well, let's listen to what he has to say for the rest of the show.
Money to indulgence peddlers like Johann Tetzel. Poor Christians believed that they had some of their sins forgiven. Worse, they were told that dead loved ones were in purgatory, and they could give money to these indulgence peddlers, and the Pope would then release their dead loved ones. Luther wrote 95 short paragraphs or theses, and on November 1st of 1517, All Saints' Day, posted them to the doors of All Saints Cathedral in Wittenberg. But what was different about Martin Luther's protest and the protests of previous Christians was the movable type printing press of Johannes Gutenberg. 95 theses were translated and replicated by the Gutenberg press and spread like wildfire. Martin Luther instantly shot to number 1 on the Vatican hit list. Remember, he was an Augustinian monk. That didn't matter. He was waking people up and freeing them from the Roman chains, and for that he needed to be stopped. He was kidnapped by his benefactor, Frederick the Wise of Saxony, and held at Wartburg Castle for several months to protect him from Vatican assassins. During that time, he translated the Bible into vernacular German, and it may have been the most important thing he ever did, starting with the New Testament and then later the Old Testament. But now the Gutenberg press started printing off large quantities of common language Bibles, and the fires of the Inquisition couldn't keep up. Other brave Christians, like William Tyndale, also a Roman Catholic priest, began translating Bibles into the language of their people. Tyndale was English, like Wycliffe, and he too was eventually executed by Rome for his crime. But now Rome had a problem. There were too many Bibles and Bible translators to be kept in check by burning them all. A new tactic was born, a tactic that English Cardinal Thomas Wolsey called learning against learning. That tactic was to discredit the Bible in order to force people to return to accepting Rome as the ultimate authority over their body and soul. In this tactic of learning against learning, Rome would literally rewrite reality and weave a false reality matrix that we now all swim in to this day. For thousands of years, mankind understood the earth to be flat and stationary. Only rarely did men like Pythagoras attempt to claim otherwise. And it's interesting to note that many Freemasons consider Pythagoras to be one of the first of their craft. But now rewriting our reality as a tactic to discredit the Bible became a top priority in the face of Martin Luther's 1517 Reformation, Protestant Reformation. The Catholic response would be the Counter-Reformation, and it would be spearheaded by a Spanish Templar knight named Ignatius of Loyola and his followers, whom we call today the Jesuit. Their first opportunity came from the Vatican's mathematician, a Polish priest named Nicholas Copernicus. Copernicus gave birth to the modern heliocentric model of the universe with his work De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. Copernicus knew he was weaving a matrix of lies and wanted to hold publication of De Revolutionibus until after his death. But powerful Roman Catholic clergy like Tiedemann Gies, Bishop of Cologne, and the papal secretary himself, Johann Wiedmanstadt, forced him to publish in 1543. The facts that Catholic clergy forced Copernicus to publish, or that Copernicus was the Vatican mathematician, or that he received his doctorate in canon law from Bologna University. Canon law are the precepts by which Rome governs nations. Adam Weishaupt was a doctor in canon law. Or that he was a Roman Catholic priest. These have all been swept under the carpet. But Copernicus never married, and even the Catholic Encyclopedia had to note that in 1537, King Sigismund of Poland put Copernicus's name on the list of 4 candidates for the vacant episcopal seat of Ermland, which makes it probable that at least in later life he had entered the priesthood. Also swept under the carpet has been the timing of the publication of Davis, right on the heels of Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. And if that's not clear enough for you, how about this? A Vatican agent named Georg Joachim Redicus, who was originally born Georg de Porus, had insinuated himself into the Luther Reformation and was in Wittenberg when he left to become a close student of Copernicus. Sources like Wikipedia claim that Redicus was sent from reformer Philip Melanchthon, a dear friend of Martin Luther, but it is absolutely Roman Catholic disinformation. In the Table Talk of Martin Luther, the great reformer is quoted as having said, "There is talk of a new astrologer who wants to prove that the earth moves and goes round instead of the sky, the sun, the moon, just as if somebody were moving in a carriage or a ship might hold that he was sitting still and at rest while the earth and the trees walked and moved. But that is how things are nowadays. When a man wishes to be clever, he must needs invent something special, and the way he does it must needs be the best. The fool wants to turn the whole art of astronomy upside down. However, as Holy Scripture tells us, so did Joshua bid the sun to stand still, and not the earth." In his lectures on the book of Genesis, Luther said, "We Christians must be different from the philosophers in the way we think about the causes of these things. And if some are beyond our comprehension, like those before us concerning the waters above the heavens, we must believe them and admit our lack of knowledge rather than either wickedly deny them or presumptuously interpret them in conformity with our own understanding." The great reformer Jean Calvin, also known as John Calvin, called Copernicus a dreamer who has a spirit of bitterness and contradiction. Reprove everything and prevent the order of nature. We will see some who are so deranged, Calvin said, not only in religion, but who in all things reveal their monstrous nature, that they will say that the sun does not move, and that it is the earth which shifts and turns. When we see such minds, we must indeed confess that the devil possesses them, and that God sets them before us as mirrors in order to keep us in his fear. So it is with all who argue out of pure malice, and that happily make a show of their imprudence. When they are told this is hot, they will reply, "No, it is plainly cold." When they are shown an object is black, they will say, "No, it is white," and vice versa. Just like the man who said that the snow is black, for although it is perceived and known all to be white, yet he clearly wished to contradict the fact. And so it is that they are madmen who try to change the natural order and even to dazzle eyes and benumb the senses. Do you think Calvin knew how the Freemasons were used by the Jesuits? When they are shown an object as black, they will say it is white.
We're talking about our government here.
No, we're talking about a crime, Bill, pure and simple. Y'all got to start thinking on a different level, like the CIA does. Now, we're through the looking glass here, people. White is black, and black is white.
Very quickly, Rome jumped upon this new model of the universe, and Jesuits like Christopher Clavius used Copernicus and his work to fabricate the Gregorian calendar, the calendar we all use. Rightly did the prophet Daniel say in chapter 7, verse 23, that during his vision, a being standing near him said, "The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it into pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall rise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and intend to change times and laws. And the saints shall be given into his hand for a time." Very quickly did Rome and people agents like the Jesuits begin to push this new cosmology. She took over astronomy and either pushed out or killed off anyone who contradicted the idea that the earth was a globe spinning in space and revolving around the sun. Even those that met her halfway didn't keep her happy, and she dealt with them as well. Teague Ottenson Brahe, whose nickname was Tycho, accepted the idea that the earth was a globe spinning in space, but still believed that his own observations and data proved that the earth was the center of the solar system and not the sun. This is known as geocentrism. Tycho wanted to follow in the steps of Martin Luther and studied at the University of Wittenberg, but was forced out by the plague. Brahe's life appeared to be frequently in danger, and in 1566 he lost a large portion of his nose in a duel. He was 20 years old at the time. He later died under mysterious circumstances at the very young age of 54. One of those who claimed it was simply an illness, a bladder infection contracted during a banquet in Prague, was his understudy Johannes Kepler. Kepler was a German astronomer and supposedly a Lutheran. Yet he had an intimate relationship with Jesuits. In 1597, Archduke Franz Ferdinand II of Austria banished all Protestants, good Roman Catholic that he was, and Kepler fled to Hungary. But the Jesuits intervened and convinced Ferdinand to allow him to return. Kepler grew up with a Jesuit uncle under the same roof of their house in Wilderstadt. Uncle Sidaldus was a Jesuit astrologer who also kept a wife. Upon the unexpected death of Tycho Brahe, Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II immediately promoted Kepler to replace him as imperial mathematician, and Kepler very quickly went to work, rewriting all of Brahe's observations to be interpreted as heliocentric and not geocentric. In a paper titled Kepler's Relation to the Jesuits, Dr. Jörg Schuppner at the University of Leipzig noted that it is well known that the order of the Jesuits was the most important and the most active Catholic order in the field of science during the 17th and 18th centuries. One field of particularly intensive, successful study carried out by the Jesuits was astronomy. Many of their names are associated with the important discoveries in the history of astronomy, such as the discovery and mapping of moon craters. It is nearly impossible to list all the names of those who made serious contributions as astronomers or mathematicians. One aspect of the considerable role the Jesuits played in the history of astronomy was their support of Johannes Kepler. Some of them stood in extensive correspondence with Kepler. Now, it was obvious to protesters like Luther and Calvin that something fishy was going on in Rome, and the papacy needed plausible deniability while she rewrote our reality. That propaganda was presented by Italian astronomer and mathematician Galileo Galilei, and it's absolutely fascinating what user-edited Wikipedia says in the entry for Galileo Galilei under the subtitle Galileo, Kepler, and Theories of Tides. Cardinal Bellarmine had written in 1615 that the Copernican system could not be defended without, quote, a true physical demonstration that the sun does not circle the earth, but the earth circles the sun. Galileo considered his theory of the tides to provide that required proof of the motion of the earth. Now, there's no link on the name Cardinal Bellarmine, which is unusual for Wikipedia. Maybe that's because Cardinal Bellarmine was Robert Bellarmine of the Society of Jesus, one of the most powerful Jesuits of his time, who was canonized as saint in 1930 and named a doctor of the church. What's more, it is ludicrous to imagine that the Earth's supposed large mass doesn't pull the moon and crash into it, and instead the magical force of gravity holds it stationary. Even more ridiculous is the idea that the moon affects tides by pulling on the water. Again, the magical, mystical force of gravity is blamed. South African author Thomas Winship wrote in 1899 his book Zetetic Cosmogony. If the moon lifted up the water, it is evident that near the land the water would be drawn away and low instead of high tide caused. Again, the velocity and path of the moon are uniform, and it follows that if she exerted any influence on the earth, that influence could only be a influence. But the tides are not uniform. And Winship uses examples from South Africa. At Port Natal, the rise and fall is about 6 feet, while at Beira, about 600 miles up the coast, the rise and fall is 26 feet. This effectually settles the matter that the moon has no influence on the tides. But Protestant reformers were on to Rome. She knew she needed a smokescreen, and she provided it. Suddenly, history was rewritten, and rather than pushing with her own agents Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and others, to rewrite our cosmology, suddenly the papacy was a defender of the flat earth. Well, just look what they did to poor Galileo. Let's do. Supposedly, Galileo was tried for heresy at the hands of that evil flat earther, Jesuit Robert Bellamy. He bravely stood by his guns and humiliated the church with a heliocentric spinning ball earth. What happened to Galileo Galilei? Well, for the last few years of his life, he was put under house arrest. Have you read anything about the Inquisition? Do you know what the Inquisition did to people when it truly considered them an enemy? Things like rotating their arms backwards until they were pulled out of their sockets, inventing special instruments that could be jammed into a person's body to rip open their bowels, putting them in a special sarcophagus filled with spikes that would gin them to the bone. You ever hear of Edgar Allan Poe? Are you familiar with his short story, Pit and the Pendulum? About a swinging, razor-sharp pendulum that lowered across a victim and would take hours to slowly saw that victim in half. Did you know it was based upon the Inquisition? A little-known secret is that the Jesuits now own astronomy. When their missionaries went across the world, across our flat earth, the first thing they did was insinuate themselves in royal courts to become the official astronomer of that kingdom. China is a great example. One of the first Jesuits in China was Matteo Ricci. Ricci and his successors, like Adam Schall and Ferdinand Verbiest, were all the royal court astronomers, and eventually fabricated the calendar for the Chinese emperor. Today, the Jesuits even have their own observatories, both in Italy and in America. They use their puppets in the American government to steal Apache holy ground on Mount Graham in Arizona. Are they reaching out extraterrestrially or interdimensionally? They appear to have answered our question with the latest piece of technology on Mount Graham, the Large Binocular Telescope Near-Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research, also known as Lucifer. And it's not surprising, given the success the Jesuits have had in rewriting our reality. Now, we're supposed to believe that Rome was against the spinning ball earth heliocentric cosmic accident cosmology of our modern understanding. Yet at every step of the way, Jesuits or Jesuit agents were there to bolster our false reality, hiding whenever possible behind convenient news. And for more on that, see our special report. It's from Johnny Cerrucci and Nick, needing to contrive an origin for our accidental existence that contradicts the Bible. Jesuit-trained Belgian priest Georges Lemaitre is the father of the so-called Big Bang Theory, the idea that first there was nothing and then it exploded. He was a close co-worker of just such a Jewish puppet, Albert Einstein. Einstein bolstered the Jesuit cosmology with his convoluted theory of relativity. The problem was that observations of both scientists and laymen weren't matching what so-called astronomers were telling us. And so Einstein fabricated the theory of relativity to claim that your reality was relative to the time-space continuum. It is purposefully almost impossible to understand. You're just supposed to trust science and astronomy. The Jesuits then jumped on with dinosaurs and Charles Darwin to claim the Earth is billions of years old. And wherever Darwin's theory of evolution had holes, Jesuits stepped up to fill the gap. Jesuits like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the father of the New Age, after fabricating the ape-like pre-humans that we supposedly came from, even students of evolution became concerned that there was a, quote, missing link between primitive apes and modern humans. A discovery was made in 1912 to bridge that gap. Having been found in Piltdown, East Sussex, England, it was named Piltdown Man. Unfortunately, it It was also found to be a hoax. The skull of a small human with the altered mandible and teeth of an orangutan. Sometime later, paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould uncovered the father of that hoax, a Jesuit priest named Pierre Teilhard Desjardins. There are many such examples in archaeology and paleontology, and yet no one asks, why would so-called scientists be fabricating evidence? The goal was to discredit the Bible, and it has been resoundingly successful. Without the spinning ball Earth, Darwinian dinosaur cosmic accident, the Bible is a science textbook. With it, critics laugh and question the Bible, and instead look to human authorities to save their souls, such as the Vicar of Christ himself, who is for the first time in Roman Catholic history.
Okay, a lot of jam-packed information there. A lot we've talked about on this show over the years, and it was good to see somebody put it all together like that. A lot of good research done there, and hopefully you'll check into one, whether you think the Earth is flat or round, whether you believe Jesuit astronomy, or whether you believe things that you can even prove through common sense, that the Earth is not a spinning globe, spinning ball. So anyway, there was also some good information regarding the Inquisition, which I might add is going on today in a quite different way, but the results are probably just the same. And as we move forward, we'll see a lot more of Jesuit intrigue as the months and years pass. We're living right now in this so-called New World Order. And the question becomes, when will America fold forever? And what I mean by that is, when is it going to really change? I mean, now people are getting the hint that it is. But when do you think America will really move into a one-world system? Good question. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.